As you all know, we are now in the second week of Advent. This is a time of preparation. A preparation for what? To answer this, allow me to repeat the words of the Christian mystic Angelus Silesius. If Christ were born in Bethlehem 1,000 times, yet not in thee, then art thou lost eternally. Subconsciously in this season, we are all preparing in our soul for the days to once again become longer, for the rebirth of the Son, and for the Christ to be born in us. Why is Christmas set for the 25th? One might reason that since historian Africanus wrote in the year 200 AD that the conception happened on March 25th, thus 280 days later, the birth would have happened on the 25th of December. But none of the Gospels offer a date for the birth of Jesus. Perhaps surprisingly, early Christianity never celebrated Christmas. In those first centuries, it was Easter that was important. Already in the Roman Empire, there was a festival for the rebirth of the sun god, and it was 3 days after the winter solstice. One could not tell that the days were getting longer until the evening of the second day after the solstice. So, in 274 AD, on the 25th of December, the Temple of Sol Invictus, meaning the unconquered sun god, was dedicated in Rome by Emperor Aurelian. Later, when Constantine allowed Christianity to be the religion of Rome back in 313 AD, he thought Sol Invictus was the same as Christ, that the sun god had come to earth as expected by the mysteries. In 352, the first celebration of Christmas anywhere in the world happened, and 2 years later, in 354, was the first celebration of Christmas in Rome. Still, Christmas did not become a major festival until the 9th century, according to the Britannica. Christianity in the East celebrated the baptism on January the 6th as the birth of Christ. Note, I said birth of Christ, not birth of Jesus. Originally, the gospel texts read, "On this day I have begotten thee." Artists depicted the Spirit of Christ as a dove released by the hands of God to descend and remain upon Jesus of Nazareth. According to early Christianity, after 3 years, Christ would fully penetrate this body, even into the bones. And thus, when he experienced death, he fully became man. What do we know about the birth of Jesus? Here, Filippo Lippi offered, in 1463, the view that Jesus was born as God in a human body. This remains the prevalent view today. He used the symbols normally used in scenes of the baptism to show the dove descending to Jesus. With this view, the significance of the baptism lost its meaning. Note Joseph sleeping, and John the Baptist depicted as a 12-year-old in the background. As the outer power of Christianity increased, the inner understanding of the Christ mystery decreased, and the festival of January the 6th ceased to have any essential meaning. The birth of Christ was placed 13 days earlier and envisioned as a coincident with the birth of Jesus. But although the error would seem to point to the loss of a great truth, profound meaning lay behind it. Although the men responsible knew nothing of it, We cannot but marvel at the subconscious wisdom at which the festival of Christmas Day was instituted. It was known to seers that spiritual vision penetrated most deeply during the 13 holy nights following the winter solstice. These visions during the 13 nights are crowned then on the 6th of January by the Christ imagination. According to Rudolf Steiner, Christ's incarnation lies between those of Lucifer and Ahriman. Christ's deed was enacted in the supersensible, as was Lucifer's deed, but Christ's deed was also enacted in the physical world. Ahriman's will be entirely within the physical world. So you see this progression. Christ's deed was an achievement beyond the power of any human being. Lucifer's deed was a deed belonging to the supersensible world. But Christ came down to the earth to perform his deed here, and men are the onlookers at this deed. The mystery of Golgotha is a deed of the gods, a concern of the gods, at which men are but the onlookers. Early Christianity had multiple leaders who had different perspectives on its theology. There were 5 main sees: Alexandria, Antioch, Jerusalem, Rome, and Constantinople. All looked to the 3 years from baptism to ascension. None of them had any interest in establishing a festival for the birth of Jesus the man. But it did become important later as materialism permeated Christianity. Arius, who you see here, was one of these early Christian leaders. He held that Jesus was a man and Christ was the Son God who was subordinate to the Father God. At this time, there was significant theological debate concerning the Holy Trinity. Arius's bishop, Wulfila, Christianized the Goths. They had no word for I. How was Wulfila to translate, I am the light of this world? Well, he took the letters from Jesus Christ's name to form a new German word and a new concept, Ich, I-C-H. Note that a child does not use the word I until about the age of 3. Interestingly, Christ would truly be a human being only after 3 years within the sheath of Jesus of Nazareth. Constantine had an interesting relationship to Christianity, which he tolerated, but did not become a Christian until his deathbed, according to legend. It was his mother, Helena, who was a Christian, and she influenced him. When Constantine became emperor in 324, he was appalled at all the theological bickering going on amongst all the different streams of Christianity within his empire and beyond. Enough, he proclaimed. He decreed that the many Christianities get together to settle their theological differences and settle them according to Roman law, that is, majority wins. The first council in 325 resulted in the Nicene Creed and in Arius being declared a heretic. After the Nicene Creed was established under Constantine, numerous other ecumenical councils followed to continue to homogenize the religion. As these theologians gathered in Nicaea in 325, Helena, his mother, was in the Holy Lands looking for evidence of Christ. It is said that she found his grave and his burial clothes, perhaps the Shroud of Turin, as well. Perhaps because of this, Constantine sought to move the capital of the Roman Empire further to the east, closer to the Holy Lands. This empire relationship played into the justification for the Crusades. I should add, Rome fell to these Gothic tribes in 476 AD. And Charlemagne was of a Gothic lineage, so he and his people originally were Arian Christians. But Charlemagne becomes ordained by the Pope to be emperor of the newly established Holy Roman Empire. By the 5th century, two of the sees, Rome and Constantinople, vied for theological supremacy. In 1054, this battle resulted in the Great Schism. At the heart of this split was the filioque. The phrase, "and from the Son," was added to the original Nicene Creed. Did the Holy Spirit come from just the Father or from both the Father and the Son? It may sound silly. The ancient mysteries, with their myths, had foreseen the day when humans would be chained to the rock. But St. Augustine had said of the ancient mysteries, they were Christian before the term came into being. Why did he say such a thing? Because their whole purpose was to prepare for the coming of the Sun God. They knew this, but in the mystery centers, only specially prepared people could be initiated into their mysteries. These centers were everywhere in the world, and their job was to bring their wisdom to the people in a way that they could understand. Hence, the myths and fairy tales and parables. Christ's words, "I have yet many things to say unto you, but ye cannot bear them now," indicates an evolution of consciousness. Christ had to speak in parables for the masses. Learning capabilities were much different back then. Myths and fairy tales were used as people learned through imaginative images and stories. One could remember word for word long stories heard only once. Individual intellect only begins in some parts of the world around the year 747 BCE, and it continues to this day. Before this time, humans were guided, yes, angelic beings incarnated as humans to help bring about the next step in evolution. With an evolution of consciousness, then reincarnation makes sense. Why secrecy about this? Christianity came to redeem all of the ancient mysteries as heresies. So Christianity wanted to call them all heresies. Thus, in the 6th century, Justinian destroyed what was left of them, and their teachers fled to the east to the remaining schools in Persia. Now, without reincarnation, we have to assume that people have always had the same capacities, but that technology and advances in culture have risen our starting point when we're born for later humans. What else do we know about placing this Christmas festival on December 25th? Before Christianity, December 25th was a celebration for the rebirth of the sun, or for the victory of the sun over darkness. On the evening of December 21st, as I said, they knew that the days were getting longer, that the sun was victorious over darkness. Thus, in Greek mythology, Helios was known as the sun god. He was beardless and drove his chariot across the heavens each day. In Persian lore, he was also known as Ahura Mazda, in Egyptian as Ra. Here we see the sun god depicted in pottery from ancient Greece. Was this behind the words, "I am the light of the world"? This mosaic of Christ as the charioteer of the sun exists in a Christian tomb of July in the Vatican necropolis, a catacomb in Rome. It is an example of early Christian art showing Christ as the unconquered sun god. It is interesting that the concept of Christ holding the whole earth in his hand that you see here in the red circle was also painted by Leonardo in his Salvator Mundi. Can we say that true Christianity exists anywhere today? In GA 158, Rudolf Steiner had this to say, quote, without the spiritual life that we have in mind, human life on earth will face a truly desolate future. The reason for this is that all the spiritual impulses of the past are exhausted. Everything that has been given to humanity by way of spiritual impulses is gradually dying away. It cannot sow any seeds for human development in the future we face. If nothing but the old impulses were to operate, the only future in sight would be one in which technology would not only dominate the whole of our external life, but would overpower and paralyze us, driving out from the human soul anything of a religious, scientific, philosophical, artistic, and even ethical nature in its highest sense. Without fresh spiritual impulses, humans will turn into something like living automatons. The Christianity which finally came into the world after hundreds and thousands of years of preparation by the mysteries has still not won the victory anywhere on earth. Anyone who could claim today that in any true and genuine sense he or she represents the Christ principle and the Christ impulse would have fallen prey to indescribable arrogance. Here is a mosaic found in the Basilica of San Vitale in Ravenna, Italy, showing the four gospel writers and the icons associated with each. This was built in the 6th century when Gothic tribes made Ravenna their capital. The feeling within this basilica is certainly quite different from the feeling in churches today. We might claim this is due to our evolution of consciousness. And if so, can it still be rescued? This by Fra Angelico shows Paul preaching and we know that Paul, on the road to Damascus, experienced the Christ, and then his eyes and ears were opened to the spiritual. Paul's life dramatically changed from this. He even changed his name from Saul. Many modern historians agree with the point of this Fra Angelico fresco that Mark's gospel is a defense of Paul, who had many enemies who would accept Pauline Christianity, which included the equality of women within the church. Paul's letters were subsequently rewritten to keep women in their place and without a voice in the new church. Of the four Gospels, two begin with the baptism, while the other two give birth stories. The nativities are in Matthew and Luke. Two dates have been debated for the birth in Matthew's story. The great historian Josephus places Herod's death after a lunar eclipse. And because such an eclipse occurred in 4 BC, it was a consensus for many years until in 1990, astronomer Paul Pratt showed there was also an eclipse in that region on the 29th of December, 1 BC. So soon after that is when Herod died. I find it interesting that Herod died soon after the slaughter of the innocents just as the Pope and the French King Philip IV died soon after they massacred the Templar Knights in 1314. Luke's story is about shepherds, not kings. Luke in chapter 1 offers a time frame when it mentions in the days of Herod. But chapter 1 is not about the birth of Jesus. Rather, it is about the birth of his mother, Mary. And remember, Mary is quite young when she conceives her Jesus. Luke does not mention King Herod again, nor does he mention a star, nor a fleeing to Egypt, nor a killing of babies that are central to Matthew's nativity. In Luke, the family is from Nazareth. They had to travel to Bethlehem to register for a census and pay their tax. In Matthew, Jesus is born in the family home in Bethlehem. Both of these frescoes by Giotto are near each other in the same cathedral. Here in the Matthew story, we see an active Joseph with a dark beard, while here in the Luke story, we see a removed, inactive Joseph. They do not appear to be the same man, and certainly not the same age. I've zoomed in so you can see each Joseph up close. This chart outlines the differences between the birth stories of Matthew and Luke. We've long assumed that there was one Jesus born as Jesus Christ. You can see a number of striking differences here. Matthew's family is fairly well off and had at least 6 siblings, while the single child Luke family is poor. Even though it seems a bit of a stretch, Mary, Joseph, and Jesus were all common names at the time. This mystical nativity by Sandro Botticelli in 1501, and that's an important year to remember, combines the kings of Matthew and the shepherds of Luke into one painting. The setting is a cave wherein they found shelter with the animals. We have 3 kings on the left, 2 shepherds on the right. Joseph is sleeping. Ox and ass are included. And we see 12 archangels above, 3 archangels midway, and on the earth there are angels and demons everywhere. He has depicted the theme of the joining of heaven and earth that once belonged to the mystery upon Golgotha. While the Matthew family raced off to Egypt, the Luke family lingered in Bethlehem for at least a week so that Jesus could be circumcised in the nearby Temple of Jerusalem. Then they returned home to Nazareth, to their Essene community. At that time, there were 3 Jewish sects: the Pharisees, the Sadducees, and the ascetic Essenes. The Dead Sea Scrolls come from the Essene community of Qumran. Out of fear of Herod and his offspring, the Matthew family will never return to Bethlehem. Instead, they elect, for safety, to move to an Essene community in Nazareth. According to Rudolf Steiner, they did not know of each other before they all settled there. There is much more to this story than we have time for, unfortunately. But we learn in Matthew about 42 generations from Abraham to Christ. There was a promise made to Abraham: the ordering of thy descendants shall be like that of the stars in heaven, from Genesis 23, verse 17. According to Steiner, this is not about numbers, but about order, celestial ordering. The true meaning is that the line of descendants was to be in accordance with an order perceptible in the groupings of the stars, which in turn are an expression of the speech of the gods. So now I'm going to show a little bit of that ordering. For those of you who have explored anthroposophy, you see the names of the three prior cosmic states before our current solar system. Interestingly, astrophysics actually does agree. The field called metallicity also concludes that to go from merely hydrogen to heavy metals, our current solar system must have had three prior ones. These are recapitulated before a new development takes place. Thus, from Abraham to David, that lineage recapitulated old Saturn. Next, from Solomon was a recapitulation of Old Sun, and so forth. Abraham, according to Steiner, was the first to have a new capacity within the brain for logical thinking and needed for development of intellectual capacities for, might call them individual intellect. Abraham's deeds using this new capacity were blessed by the high priest of the sun mysteries, Melchizedek. In that scene, he offered bread and wine, a foreshadowing. Melchizedek was the high priest of the sun mysteries. I was barely able to touch upon the numerous so-called heresies of early Christianity, but now I must mention one such group, the Gnostic Christians. Typically, once a group was deemed to be heretical, all of its books were destroyed. Sometimes some texts do survive. One Gnostic text, the Pistis Sophia, was likely to be within the collections of ancient books brought to Italy during the early Renaissance. Because of an active inquisition, such Gnostic and other esoteric texts were generally kept secret and hidden. The Inquisition could use them as evidence that led to one being burned in the town center, like Giordano Bruno was in 1600. The Pistis Sophia refers to not only two messiahs, but also to two families. The passage from chapter 59 to 62 is most significant. Two boys are described in this passage who seem to be about 12 years old. From chapter 61, we read, I'm quoting, "He embraced thee, he kissed thee, and thou also did kiss him, and you became one." With this background in Christianity and the mysteries, we can now explore the artwork of painting's greatest genius, Leonardo da Vinci. We certainly do not have sufficient time to explore the fullness of Leonardo's biography, but I'll highlight some of the important moments of his life. Born in 1452, Leonardo da Vinci was the illegitimate son of a notary, illegitimate but beloved by his father, who provided for his early education. At 8, he was enrolled in a school in nearby Florence. At 12, he had been promoted to the best artistic workshop, Andrea del Verrocchio's, where most of the famous Renaissance artists got their training. During his lifetime, Leonardo was considered more than a genius. His students had a profound love for him that could be said to be an example of love one another as I have loved you. Leonardo died on the 2nd of May in France, where he had been on the invitation of the King of France. In 1481, he abandoned his masterpiece, Adoration of the Magi. I believe he did so because he had received an initiation at the Platonic Academy just outside of Florence in his 30th year. I reasoned that Marsilio Ficino, head of the Platonic Academy, had been trained, and you'll hear about George Gemistus Plethon in a moment, to be a Hierophant. For it to be possible to be initiated, the neophyte had to be a special person already, and such was Leonardo. His initiation taught him all about Christ. He realized that Christ, his church-based religious education was not the full truth. He immediately began his Virgin of the Rocks, but while working on this, he had to leave Florence for the relative safety of Milan. And more on that. Leonardo could foresee that the rise of religious fundamentalism in a monk named Savonarola would lead to upheavals in his beloved Florence. Like Justinian, Savonarola felt not only the ancient mysteries, but all esotericism was holding back Christianity from achieving its earthly goals, namely the New Jerusalem. At age 28, Leonardo was part of the Medici household, maybe even earlier. He also became a member of the Garden of San Marcos, where he had access to its library of immense and perhaps esoteric content, as well as to garden walks with the leading philosophers of his time. There is an odd journal entry in his notebooks that says, "The Medici made me, and the Medici destroyed me." Could he be referring to the Medici role in bringing him to a form of initiation where the old me is destroyed and a new one born? Florence at this time was home to many secret schools, and Leonardo kept his private life secret. One secret we do know a bit about is that he joined the Platonic Academy, then headed by Marsilio Ficino. Other members that we know about include philosopher Pico della Mirandola and Aristotelian John Argyropoulos from Constantinople originally. When Leonardo moved to Milan, he set up his academy based on the Accademia Platonica in Florence. The original hierophant for the Accademia Platonica was George Gemistus Plethon, who I call the catalyst for the Renaissance. You see, in 1428, Byzantine Emperor John VIII asks the wisest man of his empire, Plethon, how can the churches of Rome and Constantinople be unified? Emperor John later placed Plethon, a pagan, among the set of envoys that he sent in 1438 to the Council of Florence. It was not able to reconcile the East-West schism, but Plethon's lectures in Florence ignited the Renaissance. Cosimo de' Medici attended these lectures. Out of his excitement and inspiration, he founded the Accademia Platonica with eventually Ficino as its head. Students of Plethon continued to teach well after this council ended. His lectures inspired the Renaissance paintings depicting Greek mythology. Plethon was called a prince among philosophers. He knew the works of Plato, Aristotle, Zoroaster, and all the other Greek and Egyptian philosophers as if he had been their student. Marsilio Ficino called him the second Plato, while Cardinal Bessarion speculated as to whether Plato's soul actually occupied his body. Transmigration of souls? A cardinal? Plethon brought a trunk full of books on esotericism, hermeticism, and to translate them from Greek to Latin. And this was done primarily by Ficino. In 1440, he returned to Greece to found a mystery center near in Mistra, near Sparta. Clearly, Plethon was a hierophant, meaning he could train one to become an initiate. I conjecture that Ficino was so trained, and later appreciated Leonardo in his 30th year. Now I'll show you why I think this. Leonardo and his students did extensive studies of kissing babies. Why? The Gnostic text, the Pistis Sophia, was available to Leonardo, but as we heard in the Pistis Sophia, there is a scene where it's two boys, both named Jesus, who already knew of each other, come together. They kiss each other and become one, merged. Over 30 such paintings are known to exist that have ties to Leonardo or to his academy. Here we see one claimed to be the work by Leonardo. This one by Hugues van Cleve, who became known as the Leonardo of the North. Hugues and his students painted dozens of these kissing babies. Why would any artist of this time paint this scene over and over again? More importantly, who is being depicted? Might it be the kissing scene from Pistis Sophia? Well, these boys are certainly not 12-year-olds. Did Leonardo use innocent babies for the kissing scene so as not to stir up anti-homosexual sentiment that he had had to endure earlier in his life when police arrested him and a few other young men for nudity in public? Was the intent to depict non-sexual pre-puberty intimacy? Or was this meant to be a foreshadowing of the destiny of these two boys to later merge? Here are two other examples by Hugues van Cleve. Notice how the bird on the rocks has moved, but otherwise these seem nearly identical. The Holy Infant's embracing theme was used in several Madonna studies done by Leonardo's students. Here we see the Thulan Madonna by Marco D'Aggiano, who was a student of Leonardo's. Note her hand gestures. Her left hand is on the Book of Wisdom. And what is her right hand doing? Take a moment to compare Marco D'Aggiano's Thulan Madonna to Leonardo's Virgin of the Rocks. You'll notice the obvious similar head tilt. Pay attention to the hand gestures of the Madonna. Are her hands swapped? In the Thulan, her left hand draws from the Book of Wisdom. In Virgin of the Rocks, her right hand draws from the boy she touches. Are these the same two boys in both paintings? Might they have switched places? If so, why might that be? It turns out there are two, well, actually three, Virgin of the Rocks paintings. And here you see two of them. Leonardo began this masterpiece while still in Florence in 1481, just after abandoning his adoration of the Magi. Comparing these two, well, that's going to be a whole nother lecture. So for now, we will focus on the one at the Louvre, the original. Compare this painting, called the Holy Family, to the Thulan Madonna. Here we have the Holy Infant's embracing between the hands of the woman in both. This is an important young student of Leonardo, Bernardino Luini. The female's hand gestures are exactly the same as in Virgin of the Rocks, but now with Holy Infant's embracing between her hands. What her hands are doing is incongruous for the scene. By doing this, Luini is telling the viewer that as a student, he of the themes and paintings we've been showing and has combined the various scenes into one. Here we can accurately make the comparison of her hand gestures. The Madonna's hands in Luini's paintings serve no function except to point us to the central figure of Virgin of the Rocks. Again, the tilt of her head is the same. Why did Luini mix the scenes from Virgin of the Rocks and Holy Infants Embracing. Now we come to Bernardino da Conti. Compare this to the Thulan Madonna. They are remarkably similar except for the backgrounds and some other important details. It was shocking to me that the da Conti background is the same as the Virgin of the Rocks. This is not just another Holy Infants Embracing. Obviously, this student was quite aware of all these paintings. What is symbolically meant by the book? To whom do you think its wisdom is granted? Look closely at their halos. What do the halos tell us? They show us which boy is going to be crucified, the one with the 3 crosses for a halo. Why 3 crosses on his head? Because 3 were crucified on Golgotha, the place of Adam's skull. Now compare da Conti's painting to the original Virgin of the Rocks. We see Madonna's hands reversed, and so are the children. This can only mean that the 2 children of Virgin of the Rocks are the same 2 children of Holy Infants Embracing, but on different sides. And da Conti is telling us that the central figure is bestowing wisdom to the child on the left from the Book of Wisdom. In Leonardo's painting, the bestowal is from the kneeling boy through the central figure to the sitting boy. By using the same background, da Conti was definitely trying to inform us that his painting reveals something important about his master's original Virgin of the Rocks. And here is another painting by Bernardino da Conti, who played a key role in the revelation of the mystery of the Virgin of the Rocks. Here we have the familiar 2 children from Virgin of the Rocks. Who would you expect to be in their midst? Madonna, right? This painting is called 3 Children. Given that's John the Baptist in the middle, who then are the other 2? Note the 2 boys are in exactly the same poses as in Virgin of the Rocks. The one on our left has royal robes. Unlike the Virgin of the Rocks, the boy on the right has that halo of 3 crosses. Otherwise, the hands of both boys are identical to those of the Virgin of the Rocks, and the hands of John the Baptist are similar to those of the Madonna. Why is John here between them? Does he have a future role in a transfer from the kneeling one to the sitting one? We see these paintings speaking to each other. Note, in the central figure, both have the same head tilt. Their hands, although different, have similar gestures. We've now concluded that the kneeling boy is not John the Baptist. But then, who is the boy on the left? The one who has 3 crosses for a halo, that must be Jesus. But who is the boy with the royal robes? Even Raphael must have been in on this secret. Here is his Madonna Terra Nuova from when he was 22. But how could he have been in on this secret since Leonardo had left Florence before Raphael was even born? Well, due to war, Leonardo was back in Florence from 1501 to 1506, and this painting was completed in 1505. The boy on the left is John the Baptist. The naked baby in Madonna's lap is Jesus. But here again, we have a third boy with a halo and royal robes on the right. They have painted, oh yeah, the Inquisition. At this point, I'll propose that the intended depiction of Leonardo's Virgin of the Rocks was based upon pre-Christian and early Christian theologies that expected two messiahs. If this theory of two Jesus children is to be seriously considered, then why is there just one Jesus later in life? We have heard that the Pistis Sophia spoke of a merger of two boys when they were 12. Several pre-Christian prophecies claimed that there would be two messiahs, one kingly and one priestly, and that they shall become one in thine hand. Through his students, Leonardo addresses how the two became one. This is Jesus Among the Doctors by Leonardo's student Bernardino Luini. The hand gesture over the heart of Jesus presents the theme of the two becoming one. It fell to Leonardo's students to paint the scene where these two Jesus children were united. The merging is told in Luke when Jesus was 12 years old. The family, with many others from Nazareth, had come to Jerusalem to celebrate Passover. Jesus was somehow left behind. And for 3.5 days, his parents searched, finally finding him in the temple, conversing with its doctors. Let's listen to their conversation. Parents and child. His mother said unto him, Son, why hast thou dealt with us in this way? Behold, thy father and I have sought thee for over 3 days with much sorrowing. And he said unto them, How is it that ye sought me? Did you not know that it was necessary for me to be here now in my father's house? At this point, I need to express my appreciation to Rudolf Steiner, who discovered that this merger occurred within the Holy of the Holies of the temple in Jerusalem, and thus it took over 3 days, and thus 3 days for his parents to find him. As the transformed Jesus, his parents were amazed at his newfound knowledge and wisdom. Luke continues with the words, And he went down with them and came to Nazareth and was subject unto them. But his mother kept all these sayings in her heart. And Jesus increased in wisdom, in stature, and in favor with God and man. If such knowledge existed in various early Christian communities, would there not be some other evidence? Early in the first 2 centuries, so-called heretics were excommunicated and sent into exile. After the 3rd century, heretics were put to death and their beliefs purged, with all their books burned. Here we see one surviving example done in relative safety of a painting. These two 12-year-old boys each have a halo. The painting seems to say, through their halos, or the spiritual, that they will merge spiritually for the purpose of the coming Christ. So what evidence do we have that Leonardo knew of this? His students. They took up this cause, for it would have been far too dangerous for Leonardo alone to spell out the story in his art. This Jesus Among the Doctors is by Bernardino de Beto, also known as Pinturicchio. He finished this painting in 1501. Leonardo had fled Milan at the outbreak of the Second Italian War in 1499. On the right, we see Mary and Joseph entering that scene. The books of the learned doctors have been thrown on the ground, symbolic that their knowledge fades in the face of this 12-year-old boy. Note his halo with a red cross inscribed, indicating his divine destiny. Now let's look closer. First, notice the hand gesture. It says the two will become one. Next, we notice the feet. On our right, the child with the halo is standing on the earth, barefoot. On the left, both children's feet are lifted off the earth. one by socks, one by shoes. Of these two children, one is well dressed, the other poorly dressed. Notice the colors of the well dressed boy, his green and magenta top and gold undershirt. He has a blue bound book in hand, very colorful, while the other has a white sack with something inside that might be a book. These two are departing. They represent the two Jesus children as they once were, but will no longer be. We see here these two boys are framed by 5 individuals. Their clothing colors go from left to right: black, blue, gold, green and magenta, and in the 5th, a royal purple. Each of the 4 carry an object in their hand. These have not been tossed to the earth. The 4 facing the two children represent the physical black, soma blue, psyche gold, and pneuma the rose green. This 5th is the Hierophant, who performed the spiritual merging of these two within the Holy of the Holies. The result was the boy with a halo. And one more time to see the whole painting. Leonardo abandoned what was to have been his masterpiece, the Adoration of the Magi, to paint the truth that he experienced through an initiation within the Platonic Academy in 1481, his 30th year. He immediately began to paint instead the Virgin of the Rocks. We found that Leonardo, with the help of his students, was able to show how Christ came for all of humanity. For embedded in the stories of Matthew and Jesus were 2 different streams of humanity that reached their resolution by the merging out of love. Then Christ could enter such a human body. This story, if told separately by Leonardo, would likely have led to him being condemned to death by the Inquisition. By spreading the story out over so many paintings and painters, a mystery was revealed in plain sight that was yet invisible to the Inquisition. Sheer genius on the part of Leonardo. In this vein, I found it fascinating that Rudolf Steiner said that it was part of his mission, Steiner's mission, to unite the Cain and Abel streams within humanity. Perhaps the most revealing of the many works by Leonardo's students was this by Bernardino da Conti, and also this painting by Pinturicchio that showed how the two became one, thereby enabling the birth of Christ at the baptism into a body that represented all of humanity. Whoops, I left one character unidentified. Leonardo was a lover of wisdom, of divine wisdom, of the Virgin Sophia. He taught his students through observation to seek Isis, that is, the new Isis, the divine Sophia, whom we must find if the Christ power that is ours since the mystery of Golgotha is to become alive, completely alive within us. And now you know who she is. Thank you for being such a great audience and for inwardly and fully participating in this lengthy lecture. Thank you. And now we'll take your questions.